Recording in progress.
Ready to go.
Hello and welcome everybody to our study session for City Council, September 6th, 2023. Really important topics today on homelessness and housing, and I will turn it over to our administrator, Allison Zelms, to introduce the first topic.
Thank you, Council President, council members, members of the public. The first topic is going to be an update on our evolving response to persons experiencing homelessness. We have a couple of teammates across a few departments, as well as some partners from the county who have been continuing to work together and discuss how things are going and what some next steps are. And so we will kick this off with Paul Whitman talking through how Parks has been involved and what they're seeing in their experience. And this is an added slide from what was in your packet.
Good afternoon, Council President and council members, and thank you. So I will specifically talk about issues related to people experiencing homelessness as it relates to parks. I really want to focus on park safety. Back in June, we presented some of the complaints, ongoing complaints, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, because I believe all of you have passed many of those emails and concerns on to me. And that's the perception of safety. And I really want to focus on encampments. I want to make sure that you're clear that there's a distinction. If somebody reports someone being homeless, that is not an issue that Parks responds to. I received calls that, hey, there are two people in a picnic shelter. We want them removed. Well, no, they have a right to be there. And that's our typical response when that happens. But encampments brings with it perception that the area is not safe. And especially when this happens adjacent to a playground or areas where that activity or that, you know, there is some pressure there that creates some conflict. And so that is where we focus our efforts as it relates to safety in the parks. What you're seeing is we presented that last time we were here in June, and this is the updated and revised encampment response. And I'm not going to go over it line by line. I just wanted to share with you that the main focus in the change was putting a definite timeline that we would post the campsite as our first response. And then we would follow that with attempt to make contact and provide services. At the end of that time period, the Parks Department comes in with the assistance of the police department and cleans up the area and disrupts and removes the campsite. Now, I wanted to talk about changes that has made, improvements since we last visited. I will say that anytime that we are dealing with one camper or two, one tent or two, it is a much better situation for our team to come in with a Toolcat, which is one of our small utility vehicles, and maybe one or two of our team to clean that site up, versus allowing that encampment to grow. And we're talking about 3 or 4 trucks, 4 to 10 people, half day to a full day's work. And also with that, there's damages to the parks that we have to consider. So that has been a great help to us, and I think the response, having a shorter timeline has assisted our park users feeling that the expectation of safety is there if they see that we are responding. Now, other members of the will share that you'll hear today, and we will attribute, we'll agree with this, that by breaking up that encampment, we're not really resolving the issue. We'll see the same people in another campsite. If you recall back, I believe it was in June on 7th Street, we had one encampment move across the street from one corner to the other. That's not the ideal situation. That's not what we're trying to accomplish. But in following these, our response process here, we have seen some improvement. And With that, we have improved communication with the police department. I was talking to our team this past week, and we're following through on a lot of the recommendations that they've given us. They've talked about how certain areas that were difficult to see and enforce, that were very inviting for encampments. We removed some of the branches just so we can keep an eye on things. Some of the things that continue to be a challenge for our team is that we have concerns from our team members about drug paraphernalia. It's definitely not something that they enjoy cleaning up, and we do provide training. We have been able to get the training that they need to safely mitigate that. There's also concerns about the typical situation that we come across in an encampment. There is soiled clothing, feces, just very unpleasant things that we have to deal with that goes along with the encampment. And so those are some concerns that are expressed to us about, the possibility of becoming ill or contracting a, disease based on some of the things that they have to clean up. And as far as our needs, we feel that we're able to respond within our current resources. We do push the limits of that from time to time, but at this time we're able to do that. We do want to keep the option open, and we've had this discussion with Administrator Zelms. Should we come across something that we are not trained to deal with, that we would contract out for that service. And we have experienced, I think the last time we had just experienced coming across a dead body in Cook Park. And of course, our team is not trained to deal with that. There's some extreme situations that we come across that, none of us would like to see. That was, I think Chief Franklin expressed that in our last presentation, that we don't want to see that happen to anybody. And it was a very unfortunate experience, and it's happened again this year. So with that, I just wanted to say overall, we feel that this process has provided some improvement, and it's always a challenge to offer up a park and feeling of safety when there's pressure related to an encampment. One thing I will say that we have agreement upon with police officers is if there is an imminent threat, if there is obviously if someone is setting up camp right next to a playground, that we step this timeline up. Another issue that's coming up this fall is our deer hunt, and out in the remote areas there are some encampments, and we are planning on a stepped up enforcement if there's going to be conflict with the bow hunters. Obviously, that is a safety issue that needs to be resolved, and we're planning on working through that. We've all had a sighting already of an encampment at Foster Aaron that we're preparing to respond to, and the deer hunt starts September 16th, and so we'll be preparing for that. And I'll now turn the time over to Chief Franklin.
Council President Carlson, council members, City Administrator Zelms, thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I believe that this council has asked for kind of a very in-depth review of kind of where we've been, what's been working, and what more is needed. And as you tasked us to do that, and I thought about that for a while, what jumped out to me is a little bit of a root cause analysis of the problem in front of us here. And we've been viewing the people experiencing homelessness as kind of a homogenous group, kind of a one size fits all. And as I thought about how we're going to present today and kind of come back and speak to this group, I think it's important for you guys to remember that different people that are working on this issue experience things differently. And so I'm here simply just to present the Rochester Police Department's perspective, because we deal with the most difficult subset of people experiencing homelessness population. And with that, our needs, our perspective, our lived experience in dealing with the population is different than other different groups that are collectively and holistically working on this problem and this issue. And with that, there needs to be a multi-layered approach to homelessness. There is no such thing as one size fits all. And so you're going to hear Captain Stilwell. I wanted you to hear from him. You've already heard me spoke on this issue, but you're going to hear from my captain that's in charge of dealing with this. His team is spending about 85%, his CAT team is spending about 85% of their time right now responding to this community's concerns, issues, medical calls, things like that, tent encampments. They're spending a significant amount of resources. I wanted you to hear from him, but you're going to hear about what's worked. You're going to hear about what more can be done. And then we're really going to ask you to consider some things, that would help us as Rochester PD more effectively and efficiently deal with the subset of people experiencing homelessness population that we specifically are dealing with. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. Again, I think we're just going to start with our experience, and our goal has always been to work with partners to reduce the people living in public spaces. And a lot of us didn't go into the profession with expertise there, but we're learning as we go. So I'm going to start with what's going on in the downtown, where I feel like we've had a pretty successful summer. We're continuing to focus on behavior and criminal activity more than just the fact that a person might be experiencing homelessness. It's a much easier equation for our officers to recognize disruptive behavior, threatening behavior, and criminal activity. We've continued our partnership with Security, or the city will be, and the downtown ambassadors to have a much more multi-layered approach, where we don't have to come in and tell the behaviors at a level that they can't handle it. And that's been really good. We are, thanks to our partners at Mayo, opening a downtown office and substation in the US Bank building. Hopefully in the next month. They're doing some remodeling. We plan to open some of that space to crisis response workers. So again, we're trying to put the right people in the right place for the right problem. From there, I think we'll move on to, and by all reports from our downtown officers, the experience downtown has been better this year as far as just criminal activity and disruptive behavior. Not perfect, but again, we're seeing progress there. We're doing night walks through the skyways, and we're not finding people living in those spaces. Obviously, with the change of seasons, that could change. And I know some of the teammates are going to talk about maybe what we're going to do this winter, but we believe we're in a better spot by already having set expectations in those spaces. So now let's get to encampments again. From the process of reducing the number of people sleeping in public spaces, we don't believe the process is effective anymore. Some of this is from our experience. Some of this what we heard from the recent county survey. Problem encampments are really being occupied by a small number of individuals that have received outreach and from service providers on numerous occasions. Many will remain in our view, will remain service resistant even if more housing options come online. And I think the one question our county partners asked was, would you go to a campsite if we had one? And the majority said no. And the reasons they said no was they don't want oversight, they don't want rules, they don't want to see the police. And hostility towards that group, towards our officers, is rising. That's both from their experience and what they were told, the county and their lived experience partners were told when they went into these sites. So outreach becomes real, and engagement becomes really problematic when the hostility is starting at a level that high. And so it's really not fair to either our officers to try to keep throwing them out there to rebuild relationships when we become sort of the move it along police, and we're just the face that tells them they can't do what they want to do. And so that's why we are saying that next season, like, we believe additional tools will be helpful, particularly if more shelter beds come online and we have places to tell people that they can go. We're gonna work through the winter and clean up the abandoned camps. If Parks needs that, they probably won't, but there are consequences, and there's a big camp right now on state land that, we're hearing the solution might be just clear cut all the trees there so they don't have to deal with it. They don't have the resources to come down here and do it. And we're trying our best to be good partners, but we can't be everywhere all the time.
Captain Stillwell, can I interrupt and ask what does the hostility look like? Is it resistance to
It's,
operation or?
it's resistance to complying with orders. We have reports of an encounter at an encampment where an individual raised a knife over his head and stuck it into a tree. Like, those are very dangerous situations if it's not my team taking care of them, because they know the people, they know how they act out many times. So it is really the sort of voluntary compliance that we've got up until this point is starting to wane. We're being challenged more. This small subset is ascribed rights to, you can't move me for 48 hours. So, and again, some of this is becoming counterproductive to the cleanups and those types of things. So again, we realize that we'll go from, there's a lot of people, and you'll hear the numbers camping outside right now, that will diminish, but many of them won't seek services or won't find other places. So they will move into the Skyway. So we're beginning to work on a plan to deal with that as best we can. And then I think we get down to tools that we think could help us as we make this transition out of just 100% engagement and education. And again, not that we're giving up on that, but we believe putting a different person in that position to do that initial engagement could be helpful. We're asking for a daytime camping ban in the city limits on public property. And we're asking for a discussion at least about ban on panhandling in the downtown or the medical district. Because again, we're getting a lot of folks in that area that are immune compromised or here for healthcare, and it's really causing some issues. And again, I don't want to overstate that, but we thought this would be a good time to add that to a discussion. We are looking at options to provide a partnership. We've heard from the county, the ECHO team that hired some lived experienced folks to help them with their count this time, how effective that was, and just being welcomed into the camp and being open to what services were available. So we are looking for a partnership with somebody to work in that space in the spring. And again, I think in our view, this is a winter full of educating and doing the engagement when we can, having our partners doing when they can, and finding, people with more well-rounded skill sets and dealing with all the issues that we're dealing out there to do the engagement, so everybody understands what the expectation of the next summer will be, I guess is the best way to put it. And in all this, both my team and the rest of the PD, we remain committed to working with people experiencing homelessness. Again, we're talking about a small subset that are creating havoc, not only just in neighborhoods and everything, but amongst those that are just temporarily out of shelter. But we will continue to deal with it with compassion and respect, and we aren't giving up on. You just never know which approach is going to get a person to say, hey, I've had enough of this and I want to engage the services that are provided.
Okay, I have a couple questions, but Councilmember Palmer, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I can. So a question for the city attorney. In June, we were talking about a ban on camping. So is an ordinance getting prepared to come to us for a ban on camping on property, city property?
Thank you, Council Member, Council President. No, in short, the discussion in June, there was a suggestion, a consideration of a no camping on city property, period. Not a no daytime camping. I think what evolved over the summer, the discussion that evolved over the summer from PD's perspective was a different idea than what was suggested to you in that June discussion. It also was not clear from that June discussion whether that was necessarily the will of the council going forward. The other context here I would add is just there has been some substantial back and forth about ordinance options, including what's being referred to as a ban on daytime camping is really modeled after a Portland ordinance that is relatively new. There was some significant back and forth and consideration of what that could look like here, and would really require significant buy-in by community partners as well. They need time to review and consider their perspective on this option as well. So that's some of the discussion that has been going on. And what I think is being considered or contemplated and referenced by Captain Stillwell is that that's a discussion that really is in anticipation of the next season, not something that is going to be helpful or effective for the remaining month or two here that we have before winter sets in. Does that answer your question?
Not really, because back in June when we talked about it, and I understand that the daytime one kind of makes more sense to me because they would have resources to go to, and staffing wise, it makes it easier to do it during the day. And I think I supported that in June. I think majority of the city council supported that in June. And so, you know, I'd like to see something go into effect now so that next year we're prepared. But, you know, it breaks your heart on Christmas Eve when you hear what people are trying to sleep or tent down at Silver Lake, and that just isn't humane or compassionate to me. And so I think having resources to do the no ban, and I think it's frustrating for staff to move them across the street and have them go, yeah, I got another 48 hours. So I, for one, think that we should have a daytime camping ban now, and get an ordinance sooner than later.
Sure, and I can address a few items there. I mean, there's a few one-off points. The notion of somebody moving across the street and they get an extra 48 hours is a bit of a red herring, frankly. I think we've had some discussion about those types of situations, and we don't give them an additional 48 hours, right? So we respond and deal with these situations case by case, but regardless, certainly the point is taken. What was discussed in June, or what was suggested in June, was not a no daytime camping Portland style ordinance. What was suggested, and at least I didn't hear that was the will of the council at that time. After consideration, I didn't hear that. What was suggested or contemplated at that time was a general no camping on city lands, not the no daytime camping format. Certainly if it's the will of the council to go that direction, in consideration of the complications that would present, including a reliance on community partners that may or may not support this model, certainly we'll take your direction, of course.
I think we requested that some more information and recommendations would come back to us, but I wouldn't be comfortable supporting no daytime camping without hearing from our broader community partners and even our county partners on what the potential implications are elsewhere in the system to actually enact that. That doesn't mean I wouldn't support it ever, but I feel like we would be missing some information right now.
Well, but we have our park department, we have our police department that are being forced to deal with it, whether or not our county partners are, or whoever partners you're talking about. I don't see it being radically different. I
But
mean,
it shifts the challenges to different parts of our system, whether it's our partner organizations or our county or our criminal justice system. It isn't necessarily solving much. It's just shifting the problem somewhere or the challenges somewhere else. So how do we think in that holistic way and together come up with some solutions instead of just, well, it's affecting our department, so we're gonna deal with it in this way.
Well, I think it gives us another tool to do that. And so they've had since June, we've had this discussion and, you know, I'm kind of looking at the city attorney with a nighttime ban or a daytime ban. To me, it's a ban that we talked about. And, you know, I visited these sites with the police department and they're not pleasant sites to go to. And, you know, I think having a park department person have to go and find a dead body and how do you fix this? You know, it's one thing for a policeman to find a dead body, but for a park department person doesn't sign on to do that. You know, and, you know, we've closed our bathrooms because we've had problems and
I
so,
don't disagree with you at all. I just think that there's a bigger part of the conversation that we haven't had yet, or I haven't been included in, and I know there was a recommendation around potentially including some policymakers in these conversations moving forward.
well, I
Community.
guess there's a time to kick things down the road and time for us to do something. So I think I've made my opinion quite clear.
Okay. Appreciate your opinion and perspectives always. Councilmember Keen, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I've been kind of caught up with this problem statement thing that you started out with, Chief Franklin, because we've talked about this before, like the way the police would experience people living in public spaces is different than the way parks would, or the way the county services would, or these other things. So I think that's insightful. I've also heard a couple times today, small subset. And I think I get caught up sometimes looking at these numbers of, 174 and things. And I have this, I think we all have this empathy of how they got there. But I think what I'm hearing from the experts working with it, there's also a subset that are different than that are making decisions to be there. And you didn't say this straight out, but do we need a different set of tools to deal with that problem than we need for the people that are in a different sort of, or finding themselves unsheltered for very different reasons?
Yeah.
Yeah, Councilmember, may I answer that? Yeah, let me just maybe shed a little bit more light. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying is, because there's so many layers to this, right? If the issue, what's the driving issue, the root cause of what's driving that person into homelessness? If it's rental assistance, those are kind of easy, to be honest with you. If it's substance abuse or mental crisis or domestic abuse or something like that, those are a little bit more difficult and complex. And then you have, quite frankly, we've come in contact with people that we have offered them a home. We have put them in a home. They said, nah, I'd rather be out on the street. And they're choosing to, and that's a very difficult subset of that population. So what I'm saying is, yeah, that's the subset of population that we're now dealing with that we have, quite frankly, run into roadblocks with. We have educated them, we've encouraged them, we've outreached to them as much as we possibly can. And really, this then comes down to, and maybe I can bridge the gap between what we were talking about before and now, because I've done a lot of research on this issue. And this term was a new term to me, but the term is called humane displacement. And that's what I'm talking about. It's not so much that the tents are an issue, but it's the encampments that are an issue. And that's what the Paul Whitman is talking about in reference to the cleanup of the issue. And when they kind of build large fortresses, if you will, and that becomes very complex and difficult to deal with. And so why we switched and kind of started looking at a possible daytime ban, it's a multitude of reasons. One, it's a more humane displacement policy procedure. Number two, there's always places to go for them during the daytime. There is a plethora of resources in this community. There's nowhere that they can't, there's always a place for them to go. And so to me, and it sets healthy boundaries. That's what is needed for us to deal with the subset of population that we are currently dealing with. We need healthy boundaries. You cannot be here, but here's where you can go, and trying to drive them. It is the concept of a push-pull concept. And right now you have no push. You have no push driving people to resources other than saying, would you like help? And the answer to our subset that we're dealing with is no.
Yep.
Okay, now we're left with boundaries. And so I appreciate that.
Could you scope that for me a little bit? If I don't want to get caught up too much in the numbers. If there's 170, is there 24 like this? Is there 37%?
Well, I think, what the data showed is there's 100 and some, I don't remember the exact numbers that are on the housing list. I would say they're waiting in line, right?
So they're not in this list you're talking about, the subset that is service resistant.
Mostly no. And again, another point that our ECHO teammates made is they weren't finding people camping in the day, and that matches our just what we're finding. It's hard to find people during the day because the resources where they can get fed and they can get clothing and they can get everything other than shelter are open during the day. So again, this really became how can we continue with our vision and values, which is we're not going to criminalize this, but yet have the resources available to do cleanups and do those types of things. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the experience that we had, that we've had, my officers have had, or our officers have had, and that was verified by the ECHO team when they were out surveying. They were staying out till 1, 2 in the morning just to find people camping.
Okay. So from the things I'm hearing, I do want to, I mean, I do not want to continue on having parks employees doing jobs that they weren't hired for and for exasperating police things. So I have a tendency to try to want to do something. At the same time, I support, I mean, when I read something here like a ban on handling in the Downtown Geographic, my first thought was it's going to be an open lawsuit right away. I don't want to walk us into problems doing, you know, like cutting edge stuff that is going to be viewed as we're you know, an experimental community trying to figure out how we're going to get rid of this. But I have a tendency that I want to do something, but I also appreciate that we're going to watch that we're not going to get in trouble.
And I don't think we would be an experimental community. I think it's been tried elsewhere and created lawsuits
Well, that's-
elsewhere. So that's why I was hoping our attorney could weigh in on the panhandling specifically, and then we'll turn it over to Councilmember Kirkpatrick.
I can address that topic. I'm not sure if it may be helpful to hear a little bit more on the context of that request. Yes, certainly just from my perspective, the challenge with panhandling, our current ordinance has a format that is consistent with the law, which bans aggressive panhandling. We cannot across the board ban panhandling.
Do you want to provide a
I-
little
I
more
would love to-
context?
I would
Sure.
love to provide context for that. Again, I think as we continue to attack this problem, we're attacking it from the wrong angle. You're continuing to view the problem from a 10,000-foot level with kind of one size fits all, and it's not that. And I will take full responsibility. That is poorly worded up there, so I apologize for that. But there are other cities across this country that have been very successful in like targeting banning of panhandling. For example, you can't panhandle within a certain 200 feet within a certain busy intersection. And we have some intersections like that. Southbound 52 to Second Street, left-hand turn is 2 lanes. This happened off duty, but I've seen it happen right in front of me. A car in the right-hand lane to go left-hand, holding out $1. And the person trying to get the dollar looked like a Frogger game, dodging traffic. That's a public safety issue. And so Coral Springs is a city that has done that, had great success with that. And so I apologize for the wording here. I'm not talking about all prohibition. And let me be crystally clear here. This is all about trying to drive public safety and humanity in this community. We've had 2 deaths in tents. There would have been a 3rd had the police not gone there and Narcan saved the individual. I don't think that should be acceptable anywhere. And so this is an issue that I believe that we should be dealing with. We're dealing with it the best that we possibly can. This is one tool in our toolbox to deal with one small subset of the population. This is not going to be a broad-based tool used and applied across the entire population. I believe that I was asked here today to tell you what we're facing, what we've been focusing on, what's been working, and what could possibly be done to move the ball forward and help us do our job a lot easier and more effectively and efficiently. I am simply presenting that to you to, quite frankly, determine where your political will is. And this is a political tolerance issue. You tell me where the tolerance is. And I will also say that the Rochester Police Department has taken extreme ownership in trying to encourage and educate people experiencing homelessness to a greater level than other agencies across this state. And so, and it's taking a significant amount of our resources to do that.
Councilmember Kirkpatrick.
Are you getting hot, Phantom Wing?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
You are filled with passion, and I can also feel as the chief of the Rochester Police Department that you are concerned for all of your staff that are working above and beyond to take care of a situation that is pretty much out of control in our city. So thank you. Thank you for your passion. I believe we need to do something, and we probably needed to do something a few months ago. This is a serious situation, particularly in my ward. I don't understand why we might not be able to really specifically craft a policy that is accurate and enforceable. I don't believe in writing policies that cannot and will not be enforced. That's a waste of everyone's time and money, resources, everything else. Why can we not craft an ordinance that prohibits begging and panhandling across all of our city? So I'd like more information on that. And is there an ability to quickly pull up our ordinance for no camping right now? I was under the impression that we had a no camping on public spaces ordinance in our city right now. So how are you suggesting that we change this? Obviously going from daytime, but is there a specific, is it just banned in parks? Is it banned in all public places? I've heard mention of a no sit, no lie ordinance in the past. I've heard lots of different things. I'm wondering if you can narrow it down to real specifics for me so that we can understand where we're going here, because I would cast a vote for starting to write that policy today and being reviewed by all stakeholders, the judges, the homeless, everyone that's going to be affected, so we can write an effective policy that will work at addressing this system-wide issue.
And are you talking specifically about panhandling?
Both.
So let's start with camping. There's no camping ban. There's a ban from being in the parks after close. Is it 10 or 11? I forget. But and again, that puts the police department in a really bad position, because if we start sending cops into parks in the middle of the night and chasing people out when there's no place to tell them to go, they're like, we've just committed those resources for the whole night, because so we take the lesser road there. There's a council action from 2015, I believe, that had more to do with maintenance of public spaces, but did suggest that they weren't banning camping, but that you're not allowed to set up a tent on, the boulevard, right? And so again, I think that is, these things work together. The increased hostility creates a much greater chance of a bad outcome between my staff and these folks. And so that is why we believe an ordinance that specifically bans it in those few cases where we might need it would provide them more clarity. And I don't believe we're going to be using that a bunch, because again, what we find during the day is people are in the landing or in the Salvation Army or in the library. People have places to go during the day. Encampments are the problem. Camping isn't necessarily the problem when it comes to how we evaluate. We evaluate criminal activity and behavior. Next, public safety, which are those health risks, the drug use, all those things. And then are they denying access to an area where you would normally expect, if I brought my family to the park, I'd be able to let my kids go down the slide. There wouldn't be somebody sleeping there. And so that's the calculus we're doing on every call we get. And again, we got an email from Parks about 4 new camps just before I left the North Station to come here. So again, I think just moving a problem from one neighborhood to the next. And I will say, like, we're not being innovative here. These are things that Madison has a no camping in a certain geographical area law. So I'm not arguing for any ordinance. What we're trying to start a discussion about what tools we believe would put us in a better position to succeed. And particularly when more resources come online, how do we encourage people to go, go into those spaces, get help, go to the shelter, go to, whatever the other things that will be proposed here, which I think are some really great ideas for that small group. And I'm saying it's less than 20 people, maybe 20 to 25 people. And eventually we're going to have a contact with them and we're either gonna witness criminal behavior or, so eventually they will probably end up in jail one way or the other. I mean, I think that's sort of the road we see us, this collision course on, and we're just trying to create some options for us to have more clarity.
So may I ask another question, jumping off of what you said, Captain Stillwell? You had said that, you can't, or you don't want to, I don't recall your words specifically, but move them when there's no place to go. I believe I had sent an email and I don't recall the response right now, but wasn't there, it was about a year ago, I think, that a state federal judge passed legislature that says that it is against the law to remove an encampment if there is no place else to go.
Councilmember Kirkpatrick, that is something that is part of the reason that Portland is making the changes, but that was a different district court judge. So I believe that's the Ninth Circuit Court. Does not affect the rest of the country right now.
Well, this was in the state of Minnesota. I believe
There
it said-
was a proposal in the legislative session in 2022, but that did not make it through the session.
All right, thank you.
And
Thanks.
I just want to be clear, we're committed to not moving people that we don't have a suggestion where they could go. We are committed to that. We will remain committed to that. That's just the humane thing to do. I mean, and again, I don't want to say we're totally want to pivot from this process. It's just the engagement piece for us is not effective right now with this small subset.
Thank you.
Councilmember Dennis?
Thank you. So I can see many departments from the park to the police are very passionate about this issue. It's a complex and fragile situation with people's lives. I think this is why conferences and other learning experiences are so important, bringing back ideas from cities from all over the United States. I agree with Council President Carlson about the collaboration that we need. And I see experts in the field right here from the Warming Center, from the Landing, places that have expert experience with people who are living day to day in this situation. I mentioned this a couple weeks ago when I went with my son to a concert, a Riverside concert. Many of the people weren't able to attend the concert because they were needing to stand in line to ensure they get a bed at the Warming Center. So I talked for quite a while with individuals in line and went and talked to some of the staff at the Warming Center. And one of the staff said, I'm not going to get the quote exactly right, but if you ask 70 people who are experiencing homelessness, you'll get 70 reasons why. And that was very powerful. And some of the reasons that are the top reasons, of course, are financial. We need to look at the source of the problem, better jobs, better incomes. But some of it is the lack of family, lack of connections. And I have a couple questions, but one of the questions Chief Franklin mentioned, there was a plethora of places to go during the day. And I hear Captain Stillwater say, Landing, Salvation Army, the library, but plethora is a large term. Where else besides the city library and the two entities that were mentioned are places for people experiencing homelessness to be throughout the day?
Councilmember, thank you for the question. Actually, I just had one of my staff members internally put together a kind of a continuum of care document outlining all of the resources in this community available. I apologize, I do not have that in front of me, but I will gladly email that out to this council for your consideration. So, but off the top of my head, like you said, we got the Landing, we got the library, we got Salvation Army, you got Dorothy Day, you got, there's a multitude of other places. I think there's 4 places that they can get showers. There's, I think maybe 4 or 5, 6 food shelves in this city. There is a multitude of resources. It's all laid out in that, like I said, that I had my staff put together that continuum of care document just because I asked the same question myself, is like, well, what is out there? What's available resources and how do I get that in front of my cops so that we can direct people towards those resources? And I will provide that to you.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And the other question I hear Mr. Whitman talk about the perception of fear. Many people experiencing homelessness are there because they, when I've talked to people, because they don't have anywhere else to go. And some are nomadic, some are these subsets, your situations you're referring to. But the perception of fear is something that I think is around many, people in Rochester. And then I hear with what's on the overhead and then the word hostile. Uh, Captain Stillwater, you mentioned hostile. And when President Carlson asked what the definition of that was, you said resistance to complying with orders. And then you made an example of also like there are extreme situations like a knife, and I understand like knife fights are terroristic hostile term. The word hostile invokes fear in people, is kind of a terroristic term. Just, I guess, when we're looking at the balance between, keeping peace and showing that really I guess I'll just jump to the question. What is the percentage of the word hostile threat to people in Rochester? And is there like a history of any kind of threat whatsoever?
Well,
determining
we
what's
certainly
not
have
hostile?
police reports where there's been criminal actions. We've had, we could get to the data, but, yeah, I mean, I think this whole, again, if the Councilmember Keene's question, there's 120 some of the 174 were on a housing list. We know they want services. We also know there's a group that don't want services, but aren't going to be in an encampment with 20 other people. They're going to find a place where no one can find them. They'll come into the Landing or the Salvation Army to eat. They won't start fires. They won't, create a a structure or anything like that. So again, I think it's a wide variety. And it was, and again, I'll quote Trent Flugel, who did this work, who's a personal friend of mine. He said, what a difference a year makes. The attitude towards police this year compared to last year is night and day. And I know the frustrations of some of our staff are probably not helping that, but it's really just, we've become the person that's watching them in their view, because we're being used as the hammer on anybody that won't immediately respond to someone telling them to move along. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, well, you do have a huge obligation as a police department to respond to so many different things. I guess my question was, I mean, there is breaking the law, like setting campfires and having drugs and things, but what kind of threat has there been seen for people who are residents in Rochester from people who are experiencing homelessness?
We could pull the reports. I think sometimes I always try to get to, someone calls in and complains, there's a homeless individual here. The first question is always, what is the behavior? And sometimes I have heard like, oh, they look scary. I don't want to pass them on the street. Well, I don't think that's a reasonable expectation. The police should respond to that, because that's just the thing. But then we have seen, and I believe we've had at least 2 fights with police officers in the downtown area involving people experiencing homelessness in the last week. So again, I'm not trying to overplay it, but I'm saying that my division's idea of enforcement and dealing with people is through relationships. And when those relationships can't be maintained, bad outcomes are going to happen. And I think it's terrible that we have to have our officers aren't hurt. So I'm not trying to over publicize this, but we have to take people to jail now that maybe if there would have been an intervention of a different kind earlier, maybe this wouldn't have happened. So, I think it's kind of like a lot of things. Hostile might not be the right word, but it's certainly aggression. It's certainly, yeah, we aren't going to a campground because we know the police will drive through there and we don't want to see the police. Again, I don't want to overstate because I think sometimes we hear one story and it sounds like that's happened 20 times and it only happened once, but we certainly have people that have been aggressively panhandled, that minimum threatened might be how they experienced it. But when we go through it, you know, maybe it's not quite that. So, but it is just a small number of people. I mean, most of whom are having serious mental health crises or serious addiction issues.
So Councilmember Dennis, I can actually very specifically answer your question. There's been numerous assaults at the Holiday Station on 4th Street where people have been arrested. Active fentanyl smoking in a bathroom where children and other adults need to go in and use a bathroom. A gallon of windshield washer fluid was thrown at a clerk's head and hit. There has been equipment stolen from the 3rd Avenue apartments. What else? One of our very popular downtown restaurants frequently has patrons being assaulted or verbally just kind of angrily attacked, begging for money, asking for money. Also, frequently eating condiments and leaving the trash there. So there's a significant amount of things that are going on downtown that the officer staff are dealing with, but also may minimize their ability to keep our community in a broader spectrum of public safety more safe because of the time occupied in what they're doing.
Chief Franklin.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe I can add on that a little bit, and then I want to just maybe reframe a little bit too is, you know, I'm not going to sit here and fear monger in any mean. Everything you said, Councilmember Kirkpatrick, is 100% true. Do we sometimes come in contact with people experiencing homelessness that are committing criminal acts? Certainly, absolutely. But I would not, I think I'd be doing a disservice in the city if I stood up here and broadly labeled the entire homeless community with a label of a threat to society or threat to the community. And I can't do that. What I can tell you is there certainly, without a doubt, is a public safety nexus to homelessness that includes a wide array and deep rooted issues all the way down to, you know, feces and urine in the skyways or in the stairwells, to needles left unattended and drug paraphernalia left unattended for people to pick up, to certainly rising all that entire spectrum into criminal activity. But again, I'm not going to sit here and say one population is labeled as such. I'm not comfortable doing that. And then again, just to really reframe, and I don't think we've talked about this yet, but I believe you're going to receive another slide from the city administrator that talks about some governor's public safety funds. But if you look at the asterisks or the parentheses up there, we're going to be asking for using some governor's budget money to create a homeless outreach team. Again, that is my philosophy in dealing with people experiencing homelessness. There has to be multiple layers. There has to be multiple entities involved. It's not one size fits all. And in essence, I'm asking for multiple tools for you to build out my toolbox that I can apply when necessary in a professional, empathetic, compassionate manner to help deal with the problems that we come in contact with. And again, think of it as, and again, I think that's what you asked me. I think you asked me to stand before you today and say, where you been, what's working, what additional tools do you need? And I'm saying, these are the couple of tools that I need in my toolbox to get the job done.
Councilmember Wall, and then I want to say a couple things.
That dovetails very well into my question for our council, for our administrator, our city attorney. At least 3 people here have said it's time to do something. We've had a good discussion in June, a better, more pointed one today. What is it that this council needs to do to move forward so that we're not having another discussion in December without having really addressed anything? What is a plan of action?
Councilmember Wall, I mean, I think it would be helpful to say something more specific than we're ready to do something. So if we're ready to bring back a daytime camping ordinance, then we need to do the work to make sure that it actually applies within the laws of Minnesota. If we're ready to talk more about panhandling, we need to make sure that it complies with the First Amendment. Most of those have been thrown out by the courts. And as mentioned here this afternoon, I don't think we want to set ourselves up to go to a lawsuit. But what are those specific strategies? So those two things are things that we could bring back, but if we're ready to do those specific things, it would be helpful to understand if that's what the council is ready to do versus we're ready to do something.
Thank you.
Did you want to respond, Councilmember Paul?
Well, I mean, I started with saying that I'm all in favor of an ordinance coming back to us sooner than later about banning daytime camping. And I believe that we do have at least 4 or 5 people on the council who would be willing to look at that as an ordinance, and we can always tweak it. It would have a public hearing, and I'm assuming we'd have partners look at it also before it came back to us. But I don't want to wait till next spring or summer because we're just kicking the can down the road.
So my part of the conversation with Councilmember Palmer earlier gets us back to how we're working with partners, and you aren't talking about that a lot, but I know we're working with our partners.
I believe
So
that's
if
the
that-
rest of the presentation.
I know,
You're
which
on
is what we
slide
have the
3.
rest of the presentation to talk about. So for my concerns, I feel like it's really, how do we make decisions as a council, which are hard decisions and uncomfortable and, you know, I think require a lot of intentional thought behind, but how does that situate within the conversations happening with our county and community partners and the actions that they're proposing as well? So if you're ready to turn it over, thank you very, very much for your presentation, and Ms. Edens, welcome.
All right. Good afternoon, council members, council president, Taryn Edens, and I'm really here to provide an update on some of those collaborative efforts, if you will, as being kind of serving as a liaison of that role. But it's important for you to hear all these perspectives as mentioned, right? Because as we know, this is multifaceted. So this was mentioned, but I'm providing an update on behalf of the Olmsted County Housing Stability Team on a recent point in time count their team conducted. So you can surely read through the numbers here for yourself, but this is a unique ask for their team to conduct a count in July. Usually it's done in January. And what you'll find is the numbers of individuals was at 165 in 2020, 55 in 2021, and then 174 this year. Some perspectives and why we might have seen a change in numbers. And I realize some of you have seen this presentation that's been given in different ways. So I'm going to summarize it, but some potential reasons for the difference in numbers is a lot of efforts were deployed in 2020 and 21 around housing specifically, right? So the Creek, the 105, Echo Center, the Landing, increased capacity at the Warming Center from 30 to 43 beds. Dorothy Day House also increased their capacity post-pandemic. A few changes were made. Might be a reason why you see a decrease in those numbers. So just wanted to give you a quick observation specifically on a point in time count for folks that were unsheltered specifically, and I'll touch on that a bit more. The county also shared what they learned from this experience, and general takeaways are there were more folks unsheltered than what was expected. Most were known to the team and could be considered chronically homelessness, and this was mentioned as well, as they referred to the coordinated entry system. That means they have been searching for resources and they're in a system to seek that. But you'll see a difference between those numbers going back 174 and 132, 129 were in that system, right? So there's a difference there of about 40. Another observation was that most of those folks were last housed in Olmsted County versus surrounding counties. I think there's often a perception of visitors, if you will. We found most were last housed in this county. What is our current shelter data to serve those folks if they're looking for emergency or temporary housing? The Rochester Warming Center has 43 beds and have been turning away folks nightly since November. Dorothy Day has 23 beds. They average about 21 stays since November and have had an average of 120 unique stays per month. And then Family Promise has capacity to currently serve only about 3 families, and there are 15 families on the waiting list. I'm going to transition to both near-term and short-term plans, near-term and long-term plans. Once again, I'm focusing more on the housing part, and we can have time to discuss all facets of this at the end. The first is an introduction to a policy work group. This group met on August 25th to review the same presentation the county provided and have some dialogue around priorities and ideas. This included city elected officials, county elected officials, city and county teammates, as well as folks from nonprofit and private companies that are impacted by this, right? It's certainly clear that we have different perspectives, experiences, and there's different diverging issues here, right? You'll hear that from the three different speakers alone. And really our point to drive home is it's very crucial to have the right people in the room to have these conversations and make recommendations is what we're saying. This policy work group, really the priority, I would say also to keep in mind is shifting to address our next round of efforts for planning for this upcoming winter season. So everything that has been mentioned is certainly important and needs to be continued. We also see an urgency for planning for the winter season and what that means for both enforcement and temporary housing solutions. Often we see a bit of a dip in encampments around the winter. So where do we shift that? So that would be the focus of this group at first, I would say. You'll see specifically, we do have a requested action of the council to approve 2 council members to participate in this work group. And really, this has been mentioned before in shelter work group updates, but it's the vision that this group essentially could direct the policy for staff, both at the city and county level and in collaboration with service providers to execute. A quick update on long-term plans is a new shelter. The long-term plan is to pursue a new shelter to expand upon the needs observed at the warming center. The county has been working through an RFP, which is due on September 21st. This awards up to $10 million in capital for shelters and requires a 10% match. The city has been involved thus far in supporting this request. And will include the recommendations from the shelter work group that have been brought to you before. So if you have general questions of what's going to be included, that's mentioned here. The county will be providing more information soon as communication plans are enacted. We will likely provide this as a council update. So these are general updates and other things they're doing as it relates to housing this population as well as enforcement. But I've got partners at the county, police, and parks, as you know, and we're happy to answer other questions you might have.
Councilmember Dennis.
Thank you. So thank you for your work on finding more housing options. I feel that when you say these, I have two questions. These policy work groups with the city county, has it ever been discussed of having people who are actually right now experiencing homelessness, maybe if different varieties of needs, domestic abuse or such, whatever the situation, on the policy work group?
I'll take a stab. If I don't answer it, feel free to jump in. Yeah, more or less, that's been a discussion. This group initially met on August 25th was to just get the conversation going, but it has been discussed to have folks who lived experience part of the discussion.
Okay. Oh, thank you. And I'm sorry, all these questions. My second question is barriers. A few weeks, I guess a few months ago, after talking to someone who was experiencing homelessness because no one would take her dog. Her dog was very important to her, and no place would accept pets, and so she chose to be with her dog on the streets in the cold. Is there those kind of options to eliminate barriers for people who do want homes, but maybe like the police chief mentioned that rules and regulations or some kind of barrier that inhibits them from achieving that?
Mm-hmm. I don't have a hard and fast answer for pets specifically and whether that's considered in some of these long-term solutions, but I would note that was an observed barrier that the shelter work group addressed from surveying folks with lived experience. So it's noted that that's a barrier. Another one that will certainly be addressed in the shelter, as mentioned here, is storage needs. We know that's also a big one. So I would say to some degree, those are being considered.
Thank you.
Karen, or Ms. Edens, just to touch us back to the previous conversation. So were these potential ordinance changes discussed in the broader group of partners and what the sort of ripples of making those changes would be?
I would say not at this initial meeting, but I would say that could be an opportunity for this group to discuss that policy and provide direction.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Other questions? Councilmember Keen?
Yeah, I'm not sure to ask this, but I understand the work the county does with human services, and I think they are part of the safety net so that when people do run into this situation of unsheltered, that they can try to get them back into the. Does the county, or do you think we have the same responsibility, people who choose to be homeless?
It's a really good question that I'm not sure that I can answer.
And I'm not sure there's a good answer for it, but I'm really struggling up here going through this discussion because I think what I'm being told is there's a subset of people that are service resistant, and yet we're trying to treat them like they're falling through the cracks.
Mhm.
And I think I'm being asked to take public policy and support these people, and I'm having trouble getting myself there.
Sure. I'll respond and happily leave it to anyone else that wants to. I think really the point to be considered to drive home here is ensuring that resources are offered and that we have capacity for these folks. And we really need a number of divergent solutions for different issues, right? I think that's a fair point that there really isn't one solution to fit all. I think you ensure that there is resources and there is capacity, and you respond to behavior separately than housing needs, right? I would say generally that should be taken into consideration.
Okay, yeah, and going back to your point, I think in the housing side, we're still short. Yeah, and I think, I mean, again, in your next presentation, you kind of go through some of the things we're helping, but those are longer term. If my focus or your focus on the task force is the upcoming winter, those things don't come to bear.
Yeah, I would say our focus really is the winter, which still is, in my opinion, it would be both housing and enforcement, but enforcement of a different nature because we're looking at winter instead of encampments, right? So it's both.
Thank you.
Other questions? All right, thank you to everyone who came today and supported this discussion. I know we are fairly short on time, wondering, Ms. Edens, are you comfortable starting the housing discussion? And if there's more to be had, we can assess that, but
Can we back up? I mean, are we telling the staff to come back with an ordinance for us for no daytime camping? I'm reading 4 people at least, and
my preference would be for the policy work group to be discussing as the partners and then to bring it back as a recommendation once some of the other considerations.
but
have
they've
been
had
made.
that chance since June. And I think that we have staff that are asking for something, and I think we have at least 3 or 4 council members who think an ordinance should come back, and then we can have that discussion. An ordinance is not gonna be done by next week. It will take time.
Councilmember Keen?
Yeah, again, I would support a legal assessment of what kind of tools are in front of us and what kind of risks are with it. I think that's different than saying I want to direct the ordinance. You see the difference?
Well, we're heading toward an ordinance is what I agree with what you're saying.
Okay.
Yes.
Which is what Administrator Zelms called out as what we need to do to even get to potential language.
Well, at some time, we're gonna have an ordinance that's gonna come back to us, and that's what I'm looking for, and that's the steps you're taking.
Unless it's not possible because it's not legal.
Well, other people have ordinances in Minnesota that don't allow camping in their community. And I don't
Camping's
think that
less of a
that's a,
concern than panhandling.
I didn't discuss the panhandling. Okay?
Councilmember Dennis?
Just for clarification, because it's such a broad issue with enforcement, and I want to make sure that people experiencing homelessness are not criminalized. So I am not the one in favor of this ordinance of banning until we know the options, tools, collaboration, know where people can go, because I just feel that it compounds the issue, taking this incredibly fragile situation with people's lives and creating them become criminals because they have nowhere to go. So I am not in favor of the ordinance, but I am in favor of what Councilmember Keen mentioned about having more things come back to the council to see, from these work groups to see what we can look at without passing ordinances to criminalize. Thank you.
Is that a legitimate request, Michael or Mr. Spindler-Craig?
I can try to summarize what I think I'm hearing. Certainly, some of the effort has been put in to craft and adjust a Portland style no daytime camping ordinance to what might fit in Rochester. And perhaps seeing that ordinance draft language in front of you will call out some of the significant and challenging policy questions that you need to sort through, right? They may not be legal questions. They may be pragmatic, logistical questions of how you coordinate with community partners with that particular approach. So we can certainly bring back some draft language for you to consider. Not sure if you want to address this now, but I'm not sure in what type of setting you would like to consider that. Do you just want to consider and discuss draft language and then make decisions about whether you want some sort of public hearing to consider input from community partners? What's your pleasure? And also deferring to City Administrator Zelms to chime in as well.
Mr. Keaton?
I would appreciate a draft language that could come with a recommendation informed by both police and parks. But I would want it to have a recommendation from city staff as opposed to something that you think we could do or that we could do, but you don't recommend.
I think I hear that as what could some of the challenges might be. For example, we currently have a known camping overnight in parks ordinance. So how does that work? Because there's any number of people that might want to camp in a parking space at a park in a camper, which is different than what we've typically experienced in encampments in parks. Is that now going to be allowed? What's the, those are just, what does it mean for the current no camping overnight ordinance, and really no being in a park after dark, I believe is also requirement. So it's not that that's insurmountable challenge. I mean, there is a little bit of some legal question in that, like, what does that mean? I think typically we try to enforce that as best as possible. Sometimes, in encampment where someone is kind of entrenching for multiple days is quite different than someone parking in a parking lot. But maybe it won't be perceived that way by certain folks that maybe live near, regularly utilize that park. So some of the logistical challenges and communications around that becomes very important. Do you just change that and say you can? I mean, I don't think that's what's being suggested here. But what this arguably becomes is no camping. I mean, it starts to become what we discussed in June, but with more clarity around the daytime camping components. Perhaps with the biggest challenge that I've heard from our partners is concerns about referencing voluntary or involuntary homeless, as I think the intent of that is that folks who are resistant to service would be considered more of the voluntary, even recognizing that they may have exceptional challenges to being able to accept or even seek services depending on the layers of what's happened in their life. But that has been something that has been a concern, to have that type of language in an ordinance. So those are, and typically I don't think you would have a public hearing on an ordinance change. So that would be different than what would be typical. Although there's any number of ways that we could be getting feedback short of a public hearing.
Councilmember Kirkpatrick?
I guess I like everything that I'm hearing, including what Ms. Dennis said about not criminalizing. The key is that I think the consensus of the council is that we're asking for some verbiage to be crafted that would look like an ordinance change. And that crafting needs to go to other agencies and including all the stakeholders, for instance, asking judges, for instance, asking the county, for instance, asking the folks at the warming center, the landing, maybe asking some of our unsheltered folks who are in the 174 awaiting services what they think of this. Because to me, when I hear no daytime camping, it just begs the question, ooh, where can I camp then? So those are the kinds of things that I think we need to look at, and I'm all for getting it done sooner rather than later. However, I'm not liking the idea of crafting a poor policy that can't be adequately, efficiently, and effectively enforced. So
I agree. Councilmember Wall.
As far as enforcement, it's our enforcement that has asked for it. So I don't have that trouble.
Right. Right. And there are other parts of our justice system that would be impacted as well. So having the county, including potentially the county attorney, have a chance to weigh in would, from my perspective, be helpful. Dennis.
Okay, thank you. So I definitely support the work groups, co-design, things that we can bring as many people together for solutions. But I really think that we need a public hearing. I think we need to make sure that whatever we do has a public hearing so that people can come from the community from across the street at the Warming Center and speak and let their voices be heard. Thank you.
Did you have a comment, Mr. Spindler, Craig? It's
No,
clear
we
you-
will, we'll do our best with that direction. But I would give a brief summary point too at the end if we're close to closure on this topic.
I think we're getting close, yeah.
I just want to circle back with a little bit of positivity here. This is a super challenging topic for all of you. And all of the people who are doing this work day to day, who are in this room and elsewhere. And the challenges are real. The requests from RPD and their concerns are real, and certainly don't take any of the conversation today as undermining or disagreeing with that point. I would just remind you, I think, and remind ourselves of the tremendous work that has been done, particularly over the past 3 years in this space, and how well we have done. The level of resources available and provided, while of course not perfect, is pretty amazing. The fact that we've largely gotten through these past 3 years without points of significant violence between these communities and the providers is should not be taken for granted. The fact that we have not ended up with legal action resulting from the past 3 years should not be taken for granted. That doesn't mean that we don't look to improve and look for the next points of innovation. Certainly the frustration is understandable and understood from the folks in this room. Certainly it's heard that we have a sense that we want to do something more, and we will try to bring some options to you along with what are going to be really hard questions for you. So be prepared. And in the meantime, we hope that this policy group engages in those discussions as well and has something to contribute.
And I really should have said more about that. I mean, to think about the collaboration between parks and the police department and the increase or the improvement in the processes and of how you're working together is really outstanding. And I know your teams have gone above and beyond the ask of them. So really just grateful for compassion and the hard work and trying to do the best we can as a city. So thank you. Now we probably are out of time. So Ms. Elms, any recommendations for how to?
Certainly, Council President, council members, those of you who are waiting on the next topic, thank you for participating in the first topic. We do have changes to the study session calendar. So on the 11th is when we'll be talking a little bit more about the recommendations for phase 1 of the one-time public safety funding that's from the legislature. So to Chief Franklin's point, there will be a little bit of continued discussion that's a little bit adjacent to the budget, but that's in that budget presentation. And so we had already intended to push out the conversation with Threshold Arts. We do have a pretty short conversation for you about the MetroNet cable franchise that's timely that we really need to have with you. But there's time on the 11th, so long as Ms. Edens is available to be able to push this entire topic to the 11th. And I would remind you that that's a evening where you don't have a city council meeting. So those 3 topics would likely be able to be handled in that 2.5-hour time window, perhaps even less. And then one other change to the council calendar, the ordinance change for licensure that had been listed on the study session for the 18th is going to be coming to you in reports and recommendations that evening. So you'll have just the one topic there about the sustainability update on the 18th.
Well, great. Thank you for making that all work together. And thank you for those of you that attended today for the housing discussion. Sorry, we didn't get to it, but we really needed to go deep into the homelessness conversation. So thank you. All right. Well, we will meet back here at 7. Everybody have a good break.
Recording stopped.